In linguistics, the term transcoding refers to all the automatic translation procedures from source language to target language, which occur without any apparent intercession of thought. A text where transcoding works is a text that may as well be fully and automatically translated, and therefore, a text not worth being translated by a human being. The challenge is what makes the translation process appealing, stimulating, frustrating, and satisfying all at once. When there is no problem to solve, translation becomes a plain word-by-word transposition. When this happens, then the excitement of the search for the right word to try to solve what seems to be an impossible linguistic dilemma, and the satisfaction one feels when one finally comes up with the proper solution are completely gone. Peter Newmark compares translating to an iceberg, in which the translation itself only represents the tip, and all the work behind, most of which is not even used, it is the iceberg itself. Translation theory originated from problems, and being considered by literature as the challenge of challenges, metaphors epitomize the essence of translation. First of all, metaphors are figures of speech. A figure of speech is any intentional deviation from a literal statement or common usage that emphasizes, clarifies, or embellishes both written and spoken language. Forming an integral part of language, figures of speech are found in primitive oral literatures as well as in polished poetry and prose and in everyday speech. In particular, following the traditional classification of figures of speech, metaphors belong to the category of the figures of significations, or tropes. These type of figures are based on the meaning of terms. A metaphor was defined by Giambattista Vico as the most luminous, necessary, and frequent trope. The word metaphor derives from the Greek metaphora, which means to carry or to transfer. As a figure of speech, it was first given a formal definition by Aristotle in his Poetics, where it is described as a transference between words and a deviation from literal usage based on similarities between things. In metaphors, the element transferred is that of meaning. A word takes on the meaning of a second term, which can be either equivalent, similar, or even opposite to the first. Therefore, this figure of speech consists in the interaction and overlapping of two different semantic areas, and the resulting creation of a completely new and uncommon one. A metaphor is often regarded as a simple poetic device or an ornament, but along with its aesthetic function of livening up the speech and making it more evocative, a metaphor also carries out a significant cognitive function. It can generate and explain concepts. According to the British translation theorist Peter Newmark, a metaphor has two purposes: a referential and a pragmatic one. The referential purpose is associated with the cognitive function, and it consists in the description of the reality in a more effective way compared to the literal language. The pragmatic purpose is linked to the aesthetic function, and it aims at raising interest and appealing to the senses. Newmark states that the main objective of this figure of speech is to explain reality in the clearest possible way, while the explicitation of a resemblance between things is nothing more than a consequence. This is the same idea lying at the basis of Max Black's interactionist theory, in which a metaphor is compared to a filter that deforms the common vision of reality and shows individuals a new reality they had never considered before. In his most famous work, A Textbook of Translation, Professor Peter Newmark distinguishes 6 types of metaphors and analyzes in depth the most suitable translation procedure for each of them. Metaphors can be dead, cliché or standard, stock, adapted, recent, and original. Peter Newmark proposes 7 procedures for translating metaphors. They are, in order of preference, reproducing the same image in the target language, replacing the image in the source language with a standard target language image, translation of metaphors through similes, translation of metaphors through similes in addition to sense, conversion of metaphor to sense, deletion, and use of the same metaphor combined with sense. Whatever the procedure adopted, the most important question is to choose how much space to give to sense. It is the translator's job to decide the width of the crisscrossed area of sense, while determining whether this area is connotative or denotative. It is known that a translation that only considers the meaning of words is not to be considered a good translation, but it is also important to note that the same applies to those translations that are interpreted too freely. If on the one hand a translation must have the same impact on its readers as the original text, on the other, it is important to maintain the informative content of the original text as intact as possible. A good translation has to take into account and try to give the same importance to both denotation and connotation, to both content and form. How to do this is the core problem of translating metaphors. Everything behind a metaphor determines how it has to be translated. Furthermore, when having to translate a metaphor, one cannot consider it as a separate entity. It is fundamental to consider external elements as well: the type of text in which it is collocated, the person who uses it, why it is used, and most importantly, the message that has to be conveyed and the one that has to be concealed.